face it, watching the so-called Russiagate scandal emerging from the Trump campaign and administration is pretty much the current event's equivalent of an exposed nerve ending. Even the slightest stimulation makes you throb. Now, this raw nerve social condition is great news if your job is to sell newspapers or to attract views to your website. Unfortunately, such a news atmosphere does not lend itself to clear thinking, and man, do we need some clear thinking on this. Okay, look, in case you've been living under a rock for the years we've lived through in the past few months, let's do a quick summary of events. The Trump administration is currently being investigated by 5 committees for its contacts with Russia during the 2006 presidential campaign and other associated things. Now, in any other context, a presidential campaign having contact with foreign governments, including Russia, is not really a big deal. In fact, it's expected. After all, even the Clinton campaign met with the Russian ambassador. This year, however, the context is more complicated because of the mounting evidence that Russia intervened in the 2016 election, specifically to help Donald Trump win. Now, there's little evidence that Russia's interventions actually influenced the outcome of the election, but that they tried and had a clear electoral objective casts a shadow over any interactions that the Trump campaign staff may have had with Russian contacts. If nothing else, the Russia scandal further weakens the perceived legitimacy of the Trump administration. And that's not something the administration needs, having won the election through what many recognize as a glitch in the Electoral College process, despite losing the popular vote. But add on top of that Trump's already abysmally low approval ratings, the Trump administration cannot afford to lose any legitimacy, or what poli-sci guys refer to as political capital. Now, I really don't want to go into a more detailed summary of this scandal. If you want that, there are plenty of fine sources you can go to, many of which are linked to this post. I want to take a somewhat different approach and try to slow the thinking process down a little bit. We have a real perfect storm for snap decisions going on, and it's best to apply some analysis before we go on any further. First, this kind of story with its cloak and dagger implications makes for great headlines, what is understood today as clickbait. People go on to read stories on this issue, which means the issue sells advertising space, which means there's an incentive on the part of corporate for-profit media to perpetuate this scandal and to present every new development as the smoking gun that is going to bring the presidency down. Secondly, Trump is a polarizing figure in politics. There are those like myself who feel that Trump stumbled into the presidency by taking advantage of a proto-fascist undercurrent in American culture, most probably as a publicity stunt, despite being a thin-skinned, self-promoting narcissist whose financial power and position has been proxy to having to think too deeply and whose wealth has always insulated him from the consequences of his own stupidity. On the other hand, there are those who see Trump as a veritable savior who will make America great again through his business acumen and Washington outsider status. There are those who see Trump as a threat to American democracy, while others may not like him, but feel he was lawfully elected and should have a chance to lead. Relevant to this video, there are Trump opponents who want to see him impeached, and there are Trump supporters who claim that there's no real evidence against him and that this is a scandal whipped up by the so-called liberal media. The point is, there are a few of us who are on the fence about Trump. That makes for some lively debate, but also tends to inspire a sense of closure when it comes to our particular reference groups. We tend to embrace those stories that confirm our presumptions and reject those which challenge our worldview. We may ardently share our views, but have a difficult time listening to the views of others. So as far as I'm concerned, as an admittedly biased observer, it's best to slow our thinking down before pushing that share button on that inflammatory meme. First, let's start with what we know. Those things that have been reported and confirmed to the point where we can say, yeah, this happened. We know that Russia did meddle in our election, and they did so to favor the Trump administration. It's shocking to think that a nation would interfere in another nation's democratic process. Shocking for Americans, that is. Many nations can point to the United States as interfering in their politics much more dramatically than Russia has interfered with ours today. The U.S. has actually been accused of kidnapping a head of state, Haiti's Jean-Bertrand Aristide, for instance. Perhaps this scandal is a good time to reflect on our own values. We know that Trump campaign officials met with Russian officials. Again, this in and of itself is not a big deal. However, in the context of Russian interference in the election, these meetings are suspicious and raise questions about possible collusion between the Trump campaign and Russian hackers. Among the people who met with Russian officials were the current Attorney General Jeff Sessions and former National Security Advisor Mike Flynn, both of whom lied about or admitted their meetings. Obama officials felt that Mike Flynn's connections to Russia were so questionable, they advised Trump against appointing him to the national security team. Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law and top advisor, also lied about his contacts with Russian officials. Trump's own son met with Russian officials and was not forthcoming about that information. Trump's former campaign manager, Paul Manafort, had to step down from his position after details of his ties to Russia came out. We know that Trump and his top associates have numerous political and financial ties to Russia and to Russians. Look, there are many ties between Donald Trump and Russia via his top associates. I don't want to get into all of the details here. Take a look at the list of sources for more. The point is, when Russia interferes in an election, any ties a candidate has to Russia is suspicious. When you count up business and political dealings between Trump's people and Russian officials, there are some questions that need to be answered. It doesn't help when it appears that Trump officials lied about and covered up these dealings and are not being forthcoming with investigations into this matter. If these meetings were above board, why lie? Donald Trump was also the most pro-Russian candidate. Donald Trump expressed admiration for the dictatorial Vladimir Putin, calling him a strong leader. His campaign was influential in watering down hardline language in the Republican Party platform with regard to Russia and the Ukraine, though Trump claimed he was not part of that decision, so I guess his campaign just went around changing policies without asking him about it. Trump was also critical of NATO, calling it outdated, a position that Putin would quite understandably appreciate. It's understandable why Putin might want to back Trump over the more aggressive Hillary Clinton. Now, these facts by themselves may not be indicative of anything untoward on the part of the Trump administration. Taken into context, however, they're not nothing as Trump supporters would have you think. They merit a full and total investigation into the nature of these connections and meetings and how they may have influenced the presidential campaign. And more importantly, how they may be influential over the current administration. The facts as they stand raise concerns that call into question the legitimacy of the presidential office. And this is a real problem for any government that claims to be a representative or democracy. That's my dog shaking in the background. Among these concerns are, did the Trump campaign collude with Russians to influence the presidential election? Are there conflicts of interest that compromise the administration? Is the administration covering up nefarious or even embarrassing connections that the American public should know about? And to what extent is the president directly involved? Now, here's where we have to slow our thinking down, especially those of us who are not fans of our current president. The facts, as presented, do raise concerns and offer multiple directions for speculation. These speculations must be investigated and explored. What have been identified as concerns, however, are as of yet just that, concerns. We may believe that Donald Trump is guilty of sin in some way. We may be able to point to all kinds of little dots of knowledge and connect them in such a way that we get the conclusion that we want. But this is conspiracy theory thinking. As it stands, we do not know if there was collusion. We may see quite a few conflicts of interest, but do these conflicts constitute a compromised administration? We may feel that it does, but this is a value judgment that has to be legally determined. Is the administration covering up the facts? We know that the White House is certainly not being forthcoming and that targets of the investigation, like General Mike Flynn, have not been cooperative at this point. We even know from the president himself that his decision to fire FBI Director James Comey was, at least in part, influenced by the president's animus toward the Russia investigation. There are reports that the president tried to influence Comey to let this investigation of Mike Flynn go. This is all questionable stuff. I certainly don't like it, but does this constitute interfering in an investigation? You and I might think so, but that is a legal question that must be subject to due process. This is important because we hear a lot of comparisons to Watergate, the scandal that brought down President Richard Nixon. The comparisons may be apt, but we have to remember it took about 2 years from the initial reports of the Watergate break-in for articles of impeachment to be drawn up and for the president to resign. That's how investigation works. It takes time to build a case. Worst case scenario for President Trump is that the investigation will turn up enough evidence to necessitate impeachment. However, we don't have that yet. And whoever says we do is engaging in manipulation or has a very loose understanding of the history. Look, I'd like to be rid of Trump just like any other reasonable person, but let's face it, Trump is almost certainly not going anywhere. I can say this because in 228 years, no president has ever been removed from office through the impeachment process. In the entire history of this nation, we have no precedent for this. Removing a president through impeachment is systematically difficult, intentionally so, as written into our Constitution. To be removed from office is a two-step legislative process. First, a majority of the House of Representatives must conclude that there is cause for impeachment, and impeachment becomes official when a majority of the House votes in favor of written articles of impeachment. The president is then impeached, but this does not mean he's removed from office. 2 presidents have been impeached thus far in American history, Andrew Johnson in 1868 and Bill Clinton in 1998. Neither was removed from office. Once articles of impeachment have been approved, the Senate holds what is, in essence, a trial. If two-thirds of the Senate decides that the president is guilty of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors, then the president is removed from office. That's right, two-thirds. That's a pretty difficult threshold. That's especially true when you consider the context of party politics. Both President Johnson and President Clinton faced hostile Congresses in which the opposition party was in control of the impeachment process. Johnson, a Democrat despite being Lincoln's vice president, faced overwhelming Republican resistance in the House and Senate. He violated the Tenure of Office Act, and despite the fact that the Senate was over 80% Republican, he still avoided removal from office by one vote. President Clinton, also a Democrat, was impeached for lying to a grand jury about his extramarital affair. But he only faced a Senate that was just over half Republican, not enough for a two-thirds majority. Articles of impeachment were also drawn up on Richard Nixon. Again, Nixon faced an opposition Congress controlled by Democrats. In Nixon's case, he resigned before articles could be approved by the House, largely because he had lost support within his own party. Would Nixon have been the only president to have been removed from office? For that to have happened, enough Republicans would have had to have voted against him to make up for the fact that Democrats only controlled less than 60% of the Senate. We'll never know. Trump, however, faces a different political context. The 115th Congress is majority Republican, and party politics is such today that it's unlikely that articles of impeachment can pass the House. Nor is it likely that Democrats are going to win such huge victories in 2018 to make removal via impeachment politically viable. It's also unlikely that President Trump will, like Nixon in 1974, lose enough support within his own party. After all, GOP stalwarts like John McCain and Marco Rubio were literally ridiculed by Trump during the 2016 campaign and still supported his presidential run out of party loyalty. What if it turns out that investigations can prove that, say, Trump really did intervene in the investigation or really did collude with Russia during the campaign? Well, even if we can get enough evidence to prove these accusations conclusively, removal via impeachment is still unlikely. After all, President Johnson really did defy the Tenure of Office Act. President Clinton really did lie to a grand jury, yet they were not removed from office. That's because the causes for removal, treason, bribery, and high crimes and misdemeanor, are subject to interpretation. In Johnson's and Clinton's cases, yes, they were guilty of the things they were accused of, but did their actions constitute a high crime? In both cases, the Senate decided that they did not. Is getting help for one's political campaign from a foreign power treason? Is intervening in an investigation a high crime? Your answers may say more about your political allegiances than your values. So there it is. It's almost impossible to imagine a set of circumstances that will end in President Trump's removal through impeachment. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. After all, if impeachment were easy, then it would become just another tool for political suasion and could destabilize our government. Now, the Russia scandal certainly needs to be investigated, and the truth, as best as can be discerned, must be uncovered. A democratic society must know the truth about its leadership. Once the investigations are concluded, regardless of the outcomes, we as activists can decide how these conclusions may shape our resistance to or defense of this administration. In any event, we as voters can decide just how much weight any such conclusions might have on our decisions to re-elect or to not elect Trump in 2020. In the meantime, however, neither the Democratic Party nor the political left should just sit back and hope for the desired outcome. For the left, Trump may be the embodiment of all that is wrong with our politics, but he's not the problem. In most regards, Trump is a typical standard bearer for his party and for the conservative movement, and this movement is dedicated to reshaping our nation in disturbing ways. By further disassembling the commons created by the New Deal and the Great Society and empowering the corporate elite to pursue their ends at the expense of working people and the environment, taking Trump out of the picture does not change the fundamentals of contemporary politics. Are the goals of a Mike Pence, a Mitch McConnell, or a Paul Ryan much different from Trump's? Not really. In the meantime, the political left and the Democratic Party are going to have to figure out the nature of their relationship. Just how far left is the Democratic Party willing to go, and just how willing is the left going to be to support the Democratic Party if it doesn't go far enough? How can a left-Democratic coalition come together to stem the damage being done by one-party conservative rule? As it stands, millions of people are in danger of losing health care, being poisoned by looser environmental rules, facing economic uncertainty as the Republican Party dismantles what few financial reforms were put into place after the Great Recession, facing the uncertainty of a destabilized world order in which American leadership is questionable, and the possibility that their children and grandchildren will face unknown hardships on an increasingly hotter planet. Also, There are other factors right here at home that, by any objective measure, are a greater interference in our democratic process than Russian hacking and spamming. Many states are passing draconian and unnecessary voter ID laws that have been demonstrated to disenfranchise the poor and minorities. We also have an election system that is heavily influenced by big money. In as much as 90% of cases, the candidate who spends the most money during the campaign wins. These are real issues taking place right here in the United States that we can do something about. And if we were as concerned about democratic elections as we claim to be in light of the Russia scandal, we would be addressing these issues.